The night Emily Parker let a broke stranger ride in her taxi for free, she accidentally changed the future of one of the most powerful men in New York. Rain hammered against the windshield hard enough to blur the glowing Manhattan streets into streaks of gold and red light. Midnight traffic crawled slowly through Times Square while steam rose from subway grates into the freezing December air. Emily tightened both hands around the steering wheel of her aging yellow taxi and glanced at the nearly empty gas meter with quiet frustration. Another 12-hour shift. Another night trying to stretch every dollar far enough to survive one more week. Her phone buzzed again in the cup holder beside her. Hospital payment reminder. Emily muted it immediately without reading the rest. She already knew the number. $23,000 still unpaid for her younger brother's treatments. The thoughts sat heavy inside her chest while she stopped at a red light beneath flickering neon signs and giant digital billboards advertising luxury watches most people would never touch. Around her, New York City pulsed with restless energy. Black SUVs rolled past glowing hotel entrances. Wealthy couples disappeared into rooftop bars wrapped in designer coats. Somewhere high above the streets, rich people drank champagne while ordinary people counted grocery money in tiny apartments. Emily knew exactly which world she belonged to. A freezing gust of wind swept through the street the moment she lowered her window slightly to wipe away fog. Then she noticed him. A man standing alone beneath the weak yellow glow of a broken bus stop sign across the street. Dark coat soaked from rain. Hands shoved into his pockets. Head lowered slightly against the cold. Something about him looked wrong. Not dangerous. Exhausted. Like someone carrying too much weight for too long. Cars passed him without slowing down. One taxi even splashed dirty rainwater across the sidewalk as it sped by. The man barely reacted. Emily should have kept driving. She knew that. Night shifts in Manhattan taught people to mind their own business. But something about the way he stood there alone in the freezing rain made her stomach tighten painfully. Before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled the taxi to the curb and rolled down the passenger window. "You need a ride?" The stranger looked up slowly. For one brief second, their eyes met beneath the glow of streetlights and rain. Emily immediately noticed how strikingly calm he looked despite the storm around him. Early 30s maybe. Sharp jawline. Dark hair damp from rain. Expensive posture hidden beneath cheap clothing. "I do not have cash," he said quietly. His voice was deep and controlled, but exhaustion lived underneath every word. Emily glanced at the empty street behind him. "It is 12 degrees outside." She unlocked the door. "Get in." For a second, he hesitated like he was not used to accepting help from anyone. Then he climbed into the back seat carefully, bringing cold rain and winter air into the warm taxi. The car smelled faintly of coffee, peppermint gum, and the lavender air freshener Emily bought from a gas station 2 weeks ago. The stranger leaned back silently while rain streaked across the windows around them. "Where to?" Emily asked. He stared out at the glowing Manhattan skyline for several long seconds before answering softly. "Anywhere quiet." Emily frowned slightly in the rearview mirror. "That sounds mysterious." To her surprise, the corner of his mouth almost moved. "Almost. Long night?" she asked carefully as the taxi rolled through wet streets lined with blinking traffic lights and crowded late-night diners. The stranger gave a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "You could say that." Emily glanced at him again through the mirror. His coat looked old, but the watch beneath his sleeve definitely was not. Even in the dim taxi light, she could tell it cost more than her entire car. Strange. Outside, snowflakes began mixing slowly with the rain, while Christmas lights reflected across the wet pavement like shattered glass. Somewhere in the distance, sirens echoed through the city. Emily adjusted the heater slightly warmer. "You hungry?" she asked suddenly. The stranger blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. "Excuse me?" Emily shrugged. "There is a 24-hour diner near Brooklyn Bridge. They make decent coffee and terrible pancakes." For the first time since entering the taxi, the man looked directly at her through the rearview mirror. Something unreadable passed quietly through his expression. Then he asked the question that would change both of their lives forever. "Why are you being nice to me?" Emily almost laughed at the question. The taxi rolled slowly through rain-soaked Manhattan streets, while soft jazz crackled quietly from the old radio near the dashboard. Outside, Christmas lights shimmered across wet pavement, and crowded storefront windows like melted gold. The city never really slept in December. It only glowed harder against the cold. Emily adjusted the heater slightly warmer before answering. "Because you looked like someone having a worse night than me." The stranger leaned back against the seat silently. For a moment, only the sound of windshield wipers filled the taxi. Back and forth. Back and forth. Like the city breathing around them. Emily glanced at him again through the rearview mirror. There was something strange about him. Even exhausted, he carried himself too carefully to be ordinary. His posture remained straight despite the long night. His hands looked rough from stress, not labor. And every now and then, the passing streetlights reflected off the expensive silver watch hidden beneath his coat sleeve. Definitely not broke. But Emily had spent enough years around New York strangers to know when not to ask questions. "So," she said lightly, "you always stand in freezing rain at midnight, or was tonight special?" The corner of his mouth moved slightly again. "Tonight was special." Emily smiled faintly to herself. That almost smile was progress. They crossed toward Brooklyn while snowflakes slowly replaced the rain outside. Manhattan's skyline rose behind them, glowing silver and gold against the dark winter sky. Somewhere high above the city, helicopters moved like tiny blinking stars between skyscrapers. The stranger watched the skyline quietly through the fogged window beside him. Not admiring it. Studying it. Like a man trying to decide whether he still belonged there. 10 minutes later, Emily pulled the taxi beside a small 24-hour diner tucked beneath the Brooklyn Bridge. The neon open sign flickered weakly above steamed-up windows while warm yellow light spilled onto the sidewalk outside. A few exhausted construction workers sat inside drinking coffee beside a sleeping college student buried under textbooks. It smelled like bacon grease, cheap syrup, and burnt coffee the second they walked through the door. Comfortable. Human. Emily slid into a booth near the window and tossed her wet jacket beside her. The stranger sat across from her carefully, still watching everything with quiet alertness. A tired waitress walked over holding 2 menus. "You finally taking breaks now, Emily? Trying something new?" Emily joked. "Dangerous choice." The waitress poured coffee into thick white mugs before walking away. The stranger wrapped both hands around the coffee cup without drinking. Steam curled slowly between them beneath the soft diner lights. Emily noticed his fingers. Clean nails. No wedding ring. A faint cut along one knuckle like he punched something recently, or maybe slammed his hand into a wall during an argument. "You got a name?" she asked. He hesitated only briefly. "Nathan." Not a full lie, maybe. Just not the full truth either. Emily stirred cream into her coffee. "Well, Nathan, you officially owe me one terrible diner meal. I told you I cannot pay." "Relax," she said. "I have survived worse financial decisions." That actually earned a real reaction. Nathan looked down briefly, almost hiding a quiet laugh before it disappeared again beneath exhaustion. For the first time since entering the taxi, he looked younger. Less guarded. Emily studied him carefully across the table. Whatever happened tonight had clearly broken something loose inside him. She recognized that look because she saw it in hospital waiting rooms all the time. People reached a point where exhaustion became heavier than anger. "You want the honest answer?" she asked softly. Nathan looked up. "About what? Why I stopped for you?" Snow drifted quietly outside the diner windows while traffic lights reflected red across the glass. Emily shrugged one shoulder gently. "Because everyone keeps pretending New York is too hard for kindness now." Nathan stared at her for several silent seconds. The noise of the diner faded strangely beneath that look. Then he asked quietly, "And you still believe it is not?" Emily smiled faintly. "I kind of have to." Nathan lowered his eyes toward the steaming coffee again. His voice became softer this time. More honest. You are unusual, Emily Parker. Her stomach tightened slightly hearing her full name. She never told him her last name. Nathan realized the mistake immediately. Their eyes locked across the table. Outside the diner, a black SUV suddenly pulled hard to the curb beneath the glowing neon lights. Emily's smile faded instantly the moment the black SUV stopped outside the diner. Snow drifted slowly through the glowing streetlights while the vehicle idled beside the curb like something out of another world entirely. Expensive. Silent. Untouchable. Nathan's expression changed the second he saw it through the window. Not fear exactly. Something colder. Resigned. The diner waitress glanced toward the SUV and muttered quietly, "That car costs more than this building." Emily looked back at Nathan across the booth. "You know them?" Nathan did not answer immediately. Outside, two men in dark overcoats stepped out of the SUV and scanned the diner through the fogged glass windows with professional focus. One of them spotted Nathan instantly. "Okay," Emily said slowly. "Now I am officially curious." Nathan gave a quiet breath and rubbed one hand across his face like a man already exhausted by the next 5 minutes of his life. "I should leave. That sounds suspicious." To her surprise, Nathan almost smiled again. "It probably does." The diner door opened, sending cold winter air sweeping through the room along with the scent of snow and city streets. One of the men approached their booth carefully. Mid-40s. Earpiece hidden beneath his collar. Expensive shoes polished despite the weather. He looked less like a driver and more like someone trained to stand beside power. "Sir," he said quietly to Nathan, "they have been looking for you for 3 hours." Emily blinked. "Sir?" Nathan closed his eyes briefly like he expected this exact disaster. "I turned my phone off." "Yes," the man replied carefully. "That created several problems." The second man remained near the diner entrance watching the room calmly. Emily suddenly became aware that every exhausted customer inside the diner was pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Nathan stood slowly from the booth and reached into his coat pocket. Emily expected cash. Instead, he placed a sleek black business card on the table beside her coffee cup. "For the meal," he said softly. Emily looked down at the card. No company logo. No title. Just a phone number embossed in silver lettering beside one name. Nathan Reed. Her stomach tightened slightly. Reed. She knew that name from somewhere. Nathan pulled his old coat tighter before glancing back toward her one final time beneath the warm diner lights. "Thank you for stopping tonight." Emily folded her arms. "You still have not explained how you knew my last name." Nathan's expression softened slightly. "Your taxi permit is clipped beside the dashboard." Emily blinked once. "Right. Of course." Somehow that answer disappointed her a little. Nathan noticed. "Get some sleep, Emily Parker," he said quietly. "You look exhausted." Then he walked toward the diner exit while the two men immediately moved with him and practiced synchronization. Not friends. Security. Emily watched through the fogged window as the black SUV door opened for Nathan the second he stepped outside. The snowy wind caught his dark coat beneath the glowing Brooklyn Bridge lights while traffic rolled slowly through the frozen streets behind him. For one strange second, he looked less like a broke stranger and more like someone the entire city revolved around. The SUV disappeared into the snowy Manhattan night moments later. Emily sat frozen in the booth staring at the black business card beside her untouched coffee. "Girl," the waitress whispered immediately, sliding into the opposite side of the booth. "Who exactly was that?" Emily shook her head slowly. "I have absolutely no idea." 45 minutes later, she finally climbed back into her taxi and drove toward Queens through thinning snowfall and nearly empty streets. Her apartment building looked exactly the same as always when she arrived. Flickering hallway lights. Broken mailbox downstairs. Someone arguing faintly through thin walls on the third floor. Real life. She quietly unlocked the apartment door and stepped inside. Her younger brother Liam was asleep on the couch beneath old blankets with an inhaler resting near his hand. The television glowed softly across the room, playing late-night financial news at low volume. Emily kicked off her boots and moved toward the kitchen sink before the television suddenly caught her attention. A familiar face appeared on the screen above a breaking business headline. Emily froze instantly. There he was. Clean suit. Sharp haircut. Standing beside giant digital stock market screens with camera flashes exploding around him. The news anchor's voice echoed through the tiny apartment. Nathaniel Reed, the billionaire CEO of Reed Holdings, has reportedly disappeared tonight after walking out of a confidential $4 billion merger meeting in Manhattan. Emily stared at the television in complete disbelief, while the black business cards slowly slipped from her fingers onto the kitchen floor. Emily did not sleep that night. The television continued glowing softly inside the tiny Queen's apartment, while financial reporters repeated Nathaniel Reed's name over and over again like the entire country revolved around him. Billionaire CEO. Youngest corporate chairman in Manhattan. Reed Holdings. $4 billion merger. Every phrase sounded impossible beside the memory of him sitting quietly across from her inside a cheap diner drinking burnt coffee at 2 o'clock in the morning. Liam stirred slightly beneath the blankets on the couch and coughed softly in his sleep. Emily immediately muted the television and walked over to check his inhaler beside the pillow. Empty again. Of course it was. She closed her eyes briefly and leaned against the wall, exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders like wet concrete. Outside the apartment windows, snow continued falling across Queens while distant sirens echoed somewhere beyond the neighborhood. The city looked peaceful from far away. It never really was. By 6:30 the next morning, Emily was already back inside her taxi wearing the same dark winter coat from the night before and clutching a paper coffee cup that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. New York looked different in the early morning after snow. Sidewalks glittered beneath pale sunlight. Steam curled from street grates. Exhausted commuters hurried towards subway entrances with scarves wrapped around tired faces while giant digital billboards above Times Square already flashed stock prices and luxury advertisements across the skyline. Emily stopped at a red light near 42nd Street and accidentally looked up. Then immediately regretted it. Nathaniel Reed's face stretched across a massive electronic billboard high above Times Square beside the glowing silver logo of Reed Holdings. Clean black suit. Sharp tie. Calm expression. Powerful. Untouchable. Nothing like the exhausted stranger sitting in the back of her taxi 12 hours earlier asking to drive somewhere quiet. Emily stared at the billboard in disbelief, while horns blared behind her. "Move, lady!" someone shouted through the morning traffic. She hit the gas automatically, but her heart still felt strangely unsettled. Why did it bother her so much that he lied? She barely knew him. People lied in New York every day. But somehow the memory of him sitting in that diner pretending to be ordinary felt different now. More personal. More confusing. Around noon, Emily parked near a coffee cart outside Midtown Hospital while waiting for her next ride request. Her phone buzzed with another overdue medical payment notification. Past due. Final reminder. Emily rubbed her forehead tiredly before opening her banking app anyway. Bad idea. The number staring back at her looked even worse than yesterday. She swallowed hard and glanced toward the hospital entrance where parents pushed strollers through slushy sidewalks while nurses hurried between buildings carrying hot coffee and exhaustion. "You look like someone trying not to cry in public." Emily nearly dropped her phone. She turned sharply toward the voice and froze completely. Nathaniel Reed stood beside the coffee cart wearing a charcoal overcoat and dark gloves, snowflakes melting slowly against his shoulders beneath the pale Manhattan sunlight. No cameras. No security visible this time. Just him. Calm. Composed. Completely out of place beside ordinary people buying $5 coffee. Emily stared at him in disbelief. "Are you following me?" Nathaniel glanced toward her taxi parked at the curb. "You have a giant yellow car with your license number painted on the side." Emily crossed her arms immediately. That is not an answer. To her surprise, Nathaniel looked almost amused. Almost. Fair point. The coffee vendor handed Nathaniel a cup without even asking his order first. Nathaniel passed it directly to Emily. You looked cold. Emily accepted the coffee automatically before realizing what she was doing. Warm caramel latte. Exactly what she always ordered from this cart. Her eyes narrowed immediately. How do you know what coffee I drink? Nathaniel hesitated for half a second too long. You ordered it last night. Emily frowned. At the diner I ordered black coffee. Silence. Tiny. Barely noticeable. But there. Nathaniel realized his mistake immediately. Emily stared at him harder now. You had someone watching me. Nathaniel exhaled quietly into the cold winter air. Security looked into your background after last night. Emily's stomach tightened instantly. Excuse me? Nathaniel's expression shifted slightly softer. Emily, I needed to know whether stopping your taxi created a risk. The sentence landed harder than he intended. Emily stepped backward slightly, coffee forgotten in her hand. Wow. Nathaniel noticed the hurt in her face immediately. That is not what I meant. No, Emily said quietly. I think it actually is. Then, before Nathaniel could explain further, 3 black SUVs suddenly turned the corner beside the hospital and pulled sharply toward the curb behind him. The 3 black SUVs stopped beside the curb with such smooth precision that pedestrians nearby immediately stepped out of the way without understanding why. Snow crunched beneath polished shoes as several men in dark coats stepped onto the sidewalk around Nathaniel like a moving wall. One of them approached quickly holding a phone in his gloved hand. Sir, the board meeting starts in 19 minutes. Nathaniel did not look away from Emily. Reschedule it. The man hesitated. Sir, it involves the Whitmore acquisition. Then they can wait. Emily stared at him in disbelief. Ordinary people did not speak like that. Ordinary people could not casually delay meetings involving billion-dollar companies while standing beside hospital coffee carts in winter weather. The realization unsettled her more than she expected. Nathaniel noticed immediately. Emily, do not. She stepped backward toward her taxi. You had strangers investigating me while pretending to be some random guy freezing at a bus stop. Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. I never pretended to be random. You let me think you were broke. I did not have my wallet. That is somehow worse. One of the security men quietly looked away like he was trying not to react. Nathaniel rubbed a hand across his face tiredly. You are angry. Emily almost laughed. That observation probably explains why they pay you billions. Snow drifted softly around them, while Manhattan traffic rolled through slushy streets nearby. Nurses hurried past the hospital entrance carrying paper coffee cups without realizing one of the most powerful men in New York stood 5 feet away arguing with a taxi driver. The contrast suddenly felt absurd. Nathaniel stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice. I looked into your background because last night mattered. Emily frowned immediately. Why? For the first time since she met him, Nathaniel seemed unsure how to answer something. His expression shifted subtly beneath the pale winter light. Less controlled. More honest. Because nobody talks to me the way you do. The sentence landed quietly between them while snowflakes melted against Emily's dark coat. Nathaniel glanced briefly toward the hospital entrance before continuing softly. Do you know what most people do when they recognize me? Emily folded her arms tightly against the cold. Probably ask for money. A faint smile touched Nathaniel's face. Usually. He looked back toward her fully now. You offered me pancakes. Emily hated how much that answer affected her. Around them, New York continued moving with restless winter energy. Car horns echoed through Midtown. Steam curled from street grates into freezing air. Giant digital billboards above the avenue flashed luxury advertisements across glass skyscrapers while ordinary people rushed toward jobs they barely survived. 2 completely different worlds existing on the same sidewalk. Nathaniel pulled something from his coat pocket suddenly and handed it toward her. Emily looked down cautiously. It was her taxi permit photo. Your security people stole this too? Nathaniel shook his head once. It fell onto the diner floor last night. Emily blinked in surprise before taking it carefully from his hand. Their fingers brushed for half a second in the cold air. Warm. Steady. Dangerous in a way she could not explain. Nathaniel stepped back almost immediately after the contact, like he noticed it too. One of the security men approached again carefully. Sir, the press already knows you disappeared last night. Nathaniel's expression hardened instantly. How? Someone leaked the diner location. Emily's stomach dropped. Wait. What? The security man continued carefully. There are already photographers monitoring Midtown locations connected to Mr. Reed. Nathaniel looked toward Emily immediately. Did anyone see your taxi number last night? Her silence answered the question for him. Nathaniel muttered something quietly under his breath before turning toward his security team. Find out who leaked it. Yes, sir. Emily suddenly felt exposed standing there beside him. Not because of the cold. Because she finally understood what being near someone like Nathaniel Reed actually meant. Cameras. Attention. Headlines. Strangers turning private moments into public entertainment. She stepped backward toward her taxi again. I should go. Nathaniel looked at her sharply. Emily, you live in a world where people investigate strangers before drinking coffee with them. Her voice softened slightly despite herself. I do not. Nathaniel held her gaze for several long seconds while snow continued falling around them. Then his phone rang. One glance at the screen changed his entire expression instantly. Cold. Controlled. CO again. What happened? He asked sharply into the phone. Silence. Then his jaw tightened. How many reporters? Emily felt her pulse quicken immediately. Nathaniel looked directly toward her while the color slowly disappeared from his face. They found her apartment address. Emily felt all the warmth leave her body at once. Snow continued drifting softly around the hospital sidewalk while New York traffic roared past beside them, but suddenly everything sounded far away. My apartment? She whispered. Nathaniel was already speaking sharply into the phone again. Get security there immediately. No press near the building. I want every camera removed. He listened silently for 2 seconds before his expression darkened even further. How many are already outside? Emily's stomach twisted painfully. Her mind immediately pictured Liam alone inside the apartment. Half asleep. Sick. Confused. Reporters screaming questions through broken hallway windows. Cameras shoved toward his face. She grabbed Nathaniel's sleeve before she even realized what she was doing. My brother is home alone. Nathaniel looked directly at her. I know. Then he ended the call instantly and turned toward the nearest SUV. We are leaving now. Emily blinked in disbelief. What? Get in the car. Absolutely not. Nathaniel stepped closer, lowering his voice carefully despite the urgency around them. Emily, there are probably photographers already outside your building waiting for you to arrive in a yellow taxi. This is insane. Yes, he answered calmly. It is. One of the security men opened the SUV door immediately while snow swirled beneath the pale Manhattan sky. Emily hesitated only 1 second longer before climbing inside. The leather interior smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive cologne. Warm air wrapped around her instantly while the city disappeared behind dark-tinted windows. Nathaniel entered beside her moments later, and the SUV pulled into traffic smoothly. Emily stared out at Midtown rushing past outside while her pulse refused to slow down. How does this ever happen? She asked quietly. Nathaniel loosened his gloves slowly beside her. People around me sell information for money. About everyone? About everything. The answer came too easily. Like experience. Emily looked toward him carefully now. He seemed different inside the SUV. More distant somehow. The soft honesty from the diner and coffee cart had disappeared behind something colder and controlled again. CO mode. Survival mode. Nathaniel noticed her staring. You are wondering whether last night was real. Emily looked away immediately toward the snowy city outside. I am wondering whether your entire life is completely insane. To her surprise, Nathaniel gave a quiet laugh beneath his breath. Tired. Genuine. That too. The SUV turned toward Queens while Manhattan slowly faded behind them beneath gray winter skies. Inside the silence, Emily finally noticed Nathaniel's phone vibrating constantly against the seat beside him. Call after call after call. He ignored every single one. You are really skipping some billionaire emergency meeting for this? Nathaniel glanced at her. For Liam. The correction hit her unexpectedly hard. Emily swallowed quietly and looked back out the window before he could see the sudden emotion crossing her face. 20 minutes later, the SUV slowed near her apartment block in Queens. Emily's heart dropped instantly. Reporters crowded outside the building entrance despite the snowfall. Cameras. Vans. Bright lights pointed toward her windows upstairs. Neighbors gathered nervously near the sidewalk whispering to each other while photographers argued with security guards near the entrance. One reporter actually held up a giant printed photograph of Nathaniel Reed beside Emily's taxi permit photo. Emily felt physically sick. Oh my God! Nathaniel's expression turned ice cold beside her. Stay inside the vehicle. My brother is up there. Security already reached him. Emily barely heard him. Through the SUV window, she spotted Mrs. Alvarez from downstairs being cornered by a reporter holding a microphone near her face. The elderly woman looked frightened and confused. Nathaniel immediately spoke toward the driver. Pull around the back alley entrance. The SUV moved instantly while security vehicles blocked camera crews from following. Emily stared at Nathaniel in disbelief. This happens often to people around you. Nathaniel looked toward the chaos outside with complete exhaustion in his eyes. More than you would believe. The SUV finally stopped behind the apartment building near a rusted service entrance hidden from the street. Snow covered the cracked pavement, while old fire escapes rattled softly overhead in the winter wind. Nathaniel stepped out first and held the door open for her automatically. No hesitation. No arrogance. Just instinct. Emily hurried toward the back stairwell beside him, while security guards blocked the alley entrance behind them. The old apartment hallway smelled like dust, radiator heat, and laundry detergent. Familiar. Real. Safe until today. Emily reached her apartment door with shaking hands and pushed it open quickly. Liam sat on the couch clutching his inhaler, while two suited security men stood awkwardly near the kitchen trying not to touch anything. The moment Liam saw Emily, relief flooded across his pale face. He whispered. Then his eyes shifted past her shoulder toward Nathaniel Reed standing quietly in the doorway beneath the flickering apartment light. Liam blinked once in disbelief. Why is the guy from the giant billboard in our apartment? Liam's voice echoed through the tiny apartment, while snow tapped softly against the old windows behind him. The two security guards near the kitchen immediately looked away like they suddenly found the cracked linoleum floor fascinating. Emily closed the apartment door quickly behind her and exhaled hard. Liam, she warned softly. What? He literally is. Liam sat upright on the couch beneath a pile of blankets, blonde hair messy from sleep and exhaustion. At 16, he still looked younger whenever his asthma flared up badly. His pale face lit with disbelief while he stared openly at Nathaniel standing near the doorway in a dark charcoal coat that probably cost more than everything inside the apartment combined. Nathaniel surprised everyone by answering calmly. That is technically accurate. Liam blinked once. Okay, this is insane. Emily rubbed her forehead tiredly while security guards quietly moved into the hallway outside to give them privacy. The apartment suddenly felt painfully small with Nathaniel inside it. Tiny kitchen. Peeling paint near the ceiling. Old radiator hissing uneven heat into the room. A stack of unpaid medical bills sat beside the microwave where she forgot to hide them earlier. Nathaniel noticed them immediately but said nothing. Somehow that made Emily even more aware of them. Liam shifted carefully on the couch, trying not to cough. "So," he said slowly, still staring at Nathaniel, "why are reporters outside our building?" Emily opened her mouth instantly. "Long story. Very long," Nathaniel added quietly. Liam narrowed his eyes slightly. "Did you two secretly get married or something?" "No," Emily answered so fast it almost sounded painful. Nathaniel looked mildly amused again before the expression faded beneath exhaustion. He removed his gloves slowly and glanced around the apartment for the first time. Not judgmental. Observant. Like he was trying to understand how Emily actually lived beyond snowy taxi rides and late-night coffee. His eyes paused briefly on the old family photograph taped beside the refrigerator. Emily at 12. Liam much smaller beside her. Their parents smiling behind them before life became harder. Nathaniel's expression softened almost invisibly. "Your brother should not stay here tonight," he said quietly. Emily immediately crossed her arms. "Absolutely not." Nathaniel looked toward her calmly. "There are reporters outside the building. They will leave eventually. Not if the story keeps growing." Emily hated that he sounded reasonable. Liam glanced between them curiously. "Wait. Why does this feel like watching rich people argue on Netflix?" Emily shot him a look. Nathaniel actually laughed softly this time. Real laughter. Brief but genuine enough to change the atmosphere inside the apartment for one strange second. Liam noticed immediately. "Wow," he muttered. "You are way less terrifying in person." Nathaniel leaned lightly against the kitchen counter beneath the dim apartment lights. "Most billionaires probably are." Emily stared at him in disbelief. "You are making jokes right now?" Nathaniel looked toward her carefully. "I am trying to stop your brother from panicking." Emily opened her mouth to argue again but stopped. Because Liam actually looked calmer now. Less frightened. Somehow Nathaniel understood that immediately without needing it explained. The realization unsettled her in an entirely different way. A sudden burst of camera flashes exploded outside the apartment windows. Liam flinched instantly. Emily moved toward the curtains and carefully peeked outside. Reporters crowded the sidewalk below while neighbors filmed everything on their phones from apartment balconies. One reporter pointed directly toward her window while speaking into a camera beneath falling snow. Emily stepped back immediately, stomach twisting painfully. Nathaniel noticed her shaking hands at once. "Emily." His voice lowered slightly. Gentler now. "Look at me." She did. "This is temporary." Emily gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "Easy for you to say. Tomorrow they will chase another billionaire scandal. I still have to live here." Silence filled the apartment for a moment after that. Heavy. Honest. Nathaniel glanced slowly around the tiny living room again. The worn couch. Liam's inhaler collection beside the lamp. The grocery list taped near the refrigerator with prices carefully crossed out and recalculated in pen. Something changed behind his expression then. Not pity. Understanding. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a sleek black keycard gently onto the kitchen counter. "There is a private residence hotel downtown owned by Reed Holdings," he said quietly. "Stay there tonight." Emily stared at the keycard immediately. "Nathaniel, no reporters. Full security. Private medical staff if Liam needs anything." His voice remained calm and matter-of-fact, but underneath it lived something quieter. Concern. Real concern. Emily looked at the expensive black card beneath the apartment light, and suddenly realized something terrifying. For the first time in years, someone was offering to carry part of her burden. Then Liam looked toward Nathaniel and asked the one question neither adult in the room was emotionally prepared for. "Why do you care about us so much already?" The apartment became completely silent after Liam asked the question. Snow drifted softly against the windows while distant reporters shouted somewhere below the building, but inside the tiny living room nobody moved for several long seconds. Emily looked immediately toward Nathaniel, suddenly nervous in a way she could not explain. Because she realized she wanted to hear his answer too. Nathaniel stood quietly near the kitchen counter beneath the dim apartment light, one hand resting beside the black hotel keycard. Expensive coat. Billionaire posture. Yet somehow he looked more uncomfortable answering a 16-year-old boy than facing television cameras or billion-dollar boardrooms. Liam pulled the blanket tighter around himself on the couch. Seriously, he said softly. People like you do not just help random families in Queens. Nathaniel lowered his eyes briefly before answering. Maybe they should. The room fell quiet again. Emily felt something tighten painfully inside her chest at the simplicity of that answer. Nathaniel looked toward Liam carefully now. Your sister stopped her taxi for a stranger in the middle of a snowstorm because she thought he looked lonely. His voice remained calm and steady beneath the soft apartment lighting. Most people would not have done that. Liam glanced toward Emily with a small knowing smile. Yeah. She does things like that. Emily rolled her eyes immediately even though warmth spread quietly through her chest. Nathaniel continued softly. Then she bought that stranger coffee and terrible pancakes without asking for anything in return. Liam frowned slightly. The pancakes were actually bad? Extremely, Nathaniel answered seriously. Liam laughed despite himself. The sound changed the apartment instantly. Lighter somehow. More alive. Nathaniel noticed Emily watching him then. Their eyes met briefly across the tiny room cluttered with medical bills, laundry baskets, and second-hand furniture. For one dangerous second, the chaos outside disappeared completely. Then another burst of camera flashes exploded through the apartment windows downstairs. Emily flinched immediately back to reality. Nathaniel's expression hardened again. You cannot stay here tonight. Emily crossed her arms automatically. Nathaniel, Emily. His voice lowered carefully. This stopped being harmless the moment reporters found your home. She hated that he was right. Liam coughed softly into his elbow and reached for his inhaler beside the couch. Nathaniel noticed the movement instantly. How often does that happen? Emily hesitated. The cold makes it worse. Nathaniel glanced toward the old radiator struggling uneven heat into the apartment. This building barely has insulation. Emily blinked in surprise. You know about insulation? To her shock, Nathaniel looked mildly offended. I own construction companies, Emily. Liam grinned immediately. Okay, I officially like him. Emily shook her head tiredly. You are impossible. Nathaniel's phone suddenly vibrated again across the kitchen counter. He glanced at the screen once before silencing it immediately. Emily noticed the caller ID reflected briefly in the dark glass surface. Victoria Whitmore. Nathaniel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly afterward. Colder. More guarded. Emily tried ignoring the strange discomfort tightening inside her stomach. Girlfriend? She asked lightly, pretending not to care. Nathaniel looked toward her instantly. No. The answer came too fast. Too sharp. Liam glanced between them curiously from the couch while trying not to smile. Nathaniel rubbed a hand slowly across the back of his neck before speaking again. Victoria is connected to a merger deal my board wants. Emily frowned slightly. Connected how? Nathaniel hesitated briefly. They expect me to marry her eventually. The apartment suddenly felt much smaller. Emily looked away immediately toward the snow-covered windows. Of course. Billionaires probably did not date normally. They merged lives the same way they merged corporations. Clean. Strategic. Profitable. Something inside her chest sank quietly despite her effort not to care. Nathaniel noticed the change in her expression immediately. It is not real. Emily gave a quiet, humorless laugh. That sounds familiar coming from a billionaire. Nathaniel stepped slightly closer beneath the warm apartment light. Emily. His voice softened. I have not spoken to Victoria socially in almost 8 months. Before Emily could answer, Liam suddenly sat upright on the couch staring toward the television across the room. I think your problems just got worse. Both adults turned instantly. A financial news channel flashed across the screen showing blurry photographs of Nathaniel entering Emily's apartment building beside security teams 30 minutes earlier. Beneath the images, a breaking headline scrolled across the television in bright red letters. Billionaire CEO Nathaniel Reid spotted at secret apartment of mystery woman after midnight disappearance. Emily stared at the television, while the bright red breaking news banner continued scrolling beneath blurry photographs of Nathaniel entering her apartment building. Snow fell heavily across the live footage outside while reporters crowded behind police barricades near the sidewalk. One anchor spoke excitedly about the mystery woman connected to Manhattan's youngest billionaire CEO. Another speculated about secret relationships and hidden affairs. Emily felt physically sick listening to strangers turn her entire life into entertainment. Liam muttered quietly from the couch. Well, this escalated aggressively. Nathaniel's expression became unreadable beside the kitchen counter. Cold. Controlled. Dangerous in a quiet corporate way. He picked up his phone immediately and dialed a number without taking his eyes off the television. Who authorized media surveillance on my private movements? Silence. Then his jaw tightened sharply. I do not care what the board approved. Emily wrapped her arms around herself tightly. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Nathaniel glanced toward her instantly, but she looked away before their eyes fully met. Because the frightening truth was becoming harder to ignore now. Somewhere between the taxi rides and coffee and late-night honesty, she had started caring what he thought of her. Nathaniel ended the call sharply and walked toward the television before muting it completely. The apartment fell silent except for the old radiator hissing uneven heat into the room and reporters shouting faintly outside several floors below. Emily. His voice softened carefully. Look at me. She did not want to. But she did anyway. Nathaniel stepped closer beneath the dim apartment light. None of this is your fault. Emily let out a quiet laugh without humor. Really? Because right now there are probably thousands of people online calling me a gold digger. Nathaniel's expression darkened immediately. People online are cowards with Wi-Fi. Liam tried not to laugh from the couch and failed completely. Even Emily almost smiled before exhaustion pulled her expression downward again. Nathaniel noticed immediately. He always noticed. You should never have been dragged into this, he said quietly. Emily looked toward the snow-covered windows where camera flashes still exploded against nearby buildings. But I was. Nathaniel fell silent after that. The weight inside the room shifted strangely between them. Not just stress anymore. Something more personal. More dangerous. Liam quietly reached for the television remote again and lowered the volume almost all the way down while pretending not to watch the two adults. A financial analyst now discussed Reid Holdings stock prices flashing across giant screens in Times Square. Investors are reportedly concerned after Nathaniel Reid disappeared before finalizing merger negotiations with Whitmore Capital. Emily glanced toward Nathaniel carefully. That merger really matters, huh? Nathaniel looked toward the muted television briefly before answering. It would make my board very wealthy. And Victoria Whitmore? Nathaniel's face hardened slightly at the name. Part of the arrangement. Emily nodded slowly like she understood. But deep down she did not. She could not imagine living inside a world where people discussed marriage the same way they discuss stock acquisitions. Nathaniel suddenly looked exhausted again. Not billionaire exhausted. Human exhausted. He loosened his coat slightly and glanced around the apartment once more. His eyes paused on the old grocery list near the refrigerator covered with crossed-out prices and handwritten calculations. Milk. Asthma medication. Heating bill. Nathaniel quietly looked away after reading it. Then, without saying anything, he stepped toward the kitchen counter and opened one of the old cabinets. Empty except for canned soup, cheap pasta, and half a loaf of bread. Emily immediately felt embarrassed. Nathaniel, when was the last time you bought groceries? The question came softly. Gently. Somehow that made it worse. Emily crossed her arms tighter. I am managing. Nathaniel looked toward her carefully. Emily. People say that when they are not managing, Liam added helpfully from the couch. Emily glared at him immediately. Nathaniel walked slowly toward the apartment window overlooking the snowy street below. Camera flashes reflected against the glass while reporters waited in the freezing cold hoping for another glimpse of scandal. "This is what happens around me," he said quietly. "People stop seeing human beings and start seeing headlines." Emily looked toward him now. Really looked. Expensive coat. Billionaire power. Yet somehow he sounded deeply lonely standing there beside the old apartment window. "Is that why you were standing in the snow that night?" she asked softly. Nathaniel remained silent for several long seconds. Then finally he answered without turning around. "I wanted 1 hour where nobody expected anything from me." The honesty in his voice settled heavily into the room. Emily felt something inside her chest shift painfully. Because suddenly she understood why a billionaire CEO ended up alone at a broken bus stop in the middle of winter. Then Nathaniel's phone buzzed again across the kitchen counter. He picked it up casually at first. But the second he read the message on the screen, the color slowly disappeared from his face. Emily's stomach tightened instantly.